The story of Samson is an epic tale of extraordinary strength, human weakness, and an ultimate redemption. In an era of oppression and conflict, God chose an unlikely man to lead his people. This is the account of a hero who, despite his flaws, fulfilled a divine destiny. In a turbulent time for Israel, when the Philistines ruled the land, one family stood out amid the darkness. The book of Judges tells us, in chapter 13, verse 1, that the children of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord delivered them into the hand of the Philistines for 40 years. In this context, verse 2 introduces us to Manoah and his wife, a couple from the tribe of Dan. There was a certain man from Zorah, of the family of the Danites, whose name was Manoah, and his wife was barren and had borne no children. One day something extraordinary happened. Verses 3 to 5 describe, "The angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her, 'Indeed now, you are barren and have borne no children, but you shall conceive and bear a son. Now therefore, please be careful not to drink wine or similar drink, and not to eat anything unclean. For behold, you shall conceive and bear a son, and no razor shall come upon his head, for the child shall be a Nazirite to God from the womb.' The woman, amazed and perhaps a little frightened, ran to tell her husband." Verses 6 and 7 narrate, "So the woman came and told her husband, saying, 'A man of God came to me, and his countenance was like the countenance of the angel of God, very awesome. But I did not ask him where he was from, and he did not tell me his name. And he said to me, Behold, you shall conceive and bear a son. Now drink no wine or similar drink, nor eat anything unclean, for the child shall be a Nazirite to God from the womb to the day of his death.' Manoah, wanting to confirm the message, prayed to the Lord." Verse 8 says, "Then Manoah prayed to the Lord and said, 'O my Lord, please let the man of God whom you sent come to us again, and teach us what we shall do for the child who will be born.' As verse 9 shows, "And God listened to the voice of Manoah, and the angel appeared again, reiterating the previous instructions." The couple was so impressed by the angelic visit that Manoah, not initially recognizing that it was an angel, offered to prepare a young goat as a meal. In verses 15 to 18, we read, "Then Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, 'Please let us detain you, and we will prepare a young goat for you.' But the angel of the Lord said to Manoah, 'Though you detain me, I will not eat your food. But if you offer a burnt offering, you must offer it to the Lord.' Manoah asked him, 'What is your name, that when your words come to pass we may honor you?' And the angel of the Lord said to him, 'Why do you ask my name, seeing it is wonderful?'" Verses 19 and 20 describe an impressive scene. "So Manoah took the young goat with the grain offering, and offered it upon the rock to the Lord. And he did a wondrous thing while Manoah and his wife looked on. It happened as the flame went up toward heaven from the altar. The angel of the Lord ascended in the flame of the altar. When Manoah and his wife saw this, they fell on their faces to the ground. Fearing for his life, Manoah exclaimed, as recorded in verse 22, 'We shall surely die because we have seen God.' But his wife with wisdom reassured him in the following verse, 'If the Lord had desired to kill us, he would not have accepted a burnt offering and a grain offering from our hands. Nor would he have shown us all these things, nor would he have told us such things as these at this time.'" Verse 24 tells us that, as promised, the woman bore a son and called his name Samson, and the child grew, and the Lord blessed him. From birth, it was evident that this boy was special. As Samson grew, the first signs of his supernatural strength began to manifest. The most visible aspect of his consecration as a Nazirite was his hair, which had never been cut, as commanded in verse 5. As Samson entered youth, verse 25 tells us that the Spirit of the Lord began to move upon him at Mahaneh-dan, between Zorah and Eshtaol. This phrase marks the beginning of his divine mission, situating Samson on the border between Israelite territory and that of the Philistines, foreshadowing his role as a defender of Israel against its oppressors. Thus ends the introduction to Samson's life, a boy born from a divine promise, raised as a Nazirite, endowed with supernatural strength and moved by the Spirit of the Lord. The stage was set for the extraordinary feats and dramatic conflicts that would define his life and shape the history of Israel. Samson's youth was marked by controversial choices and confrontations with the Philistines, beginning with his search for a wife. In Judges 14, 1-2, we read, "Now Samson went down to Timnah, and saw a woman in Timnah of the daughters of the Philistines. So he went up and told his father and mother, saying, I have seen a woman in Timnah of the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore, get her for me as a wife. This decision surprised his parents, who questioned his choice. Verse 3 states, Then his father and mother said to him, Is there no woman among the daughters of your brethren, or among all my people, that you must go and get a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines? And Samson said to his father, Get her for me, for she pleases me well. This passage reveals not only Samson's determination, but also the tension between the Israelites and the Philistines. What Samson's parents did not know was that this choice was part of a larger divine plan. Verse 4 clarifies, But his father and mother did not know that it was of the Lord, that he was seeking an occasion to move against the Philistines. For at that time, the Philistines had dominion over Israel. During a trip to Timnah to see the woman, Samson had his first supernatural encounter with a lion. Verses 5 and 6 describe, So Samson went down to Timnah with his father and mother and came to the vineyards of Timnah. Now to his surprise, a young lion came roaring against him. And the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and he tore the lion apart as one would have torn apart a young goat, though he had nothing in his hand. But he did not tell his father or his mother what he had done. This incident was just the beginning of Samson's displays of supernatural strength. Later, when he returned to marry the woman from Timnah, he made a surprising discovery. Verses 8 and 9 recount, After some time, when he returned to get her, he turned aside to see the carcass of the lion. And behold, a swarm of bees and honey were in the carcass of the lion. He took some of it in his hands and went along eating. When he came to his father and mother, he gave some to them, and they also ate. But he did not tell them that he had taken the honey out of the carcass of the lion. This unusual experience inspired Samson to propose a riddle during his wedding feast. Verses 12 to 14 describe, Samson said to them, Let me now put forth a riddle to you. If you can tell me what it is within the 7 days of the feast and solve it, I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes. But if you cannot solve it, you must give me 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes. And they said to him, Put forth your riddle, that we may hear it. So he said to them, Out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet. For 3 days they could not solve the riddle. The riddle proved to be too difficult for the guests, who resorted to desperate measures to find the answer. Verses 15 to 17 recount, On the 4th day they said to Samson's wife, Coax your husband into explaining the riddle to us, or we will burn you and your father's household to death. Did you invite us here to impoverish us? Then Samson's wife threw herself on him, sobbing, You hate me. You don't really love me. You've given my people a riddle, but you haven't told me the answer. I haven't even explained it to my father or mother, he replied, so why should I explain it to you? She cried during the 7 days of the feast, and finally, on the 7th day, he told her, because she continued to press him. She in turn explained the riddle to her people. His wife's betrayal enraged Samson, leading him to fulfill his promise in an unexpected way. Verses 19 and 20 describe, Then the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him. He went down to Ashkelon, struck down 30 of their men, stripped them of everything, and gave their clothes to those who had explained the riddle. Burning with anger, he returned to his father's home, and Samson's wife was given to one of his companions who had attended him at the feast. This incident marked the beginning of a series of confrontations between Samson and the Philistines. In chapter 15, we see Samson seeking revenge after discovering that his wife had been given to another man. Verses 4 and 5 recount one of his most famous feats. So Samson went out and caught 300 foxes and tied them tail to tail in pairs. He then fastened a torch to every pair of tails, lit the torches, and let the foxes loose in the standing grain of the Philistines. He burned up the shocks and standing grain, together with the vineyards and olive groves. This action triggered a chain reaction of violence. In retaliation, the Philistines burned Samson's wife and her father, prompting Samson to vow revenge. Verse 8 describes, He attacked them viciously and slaughtered many of them. Then he went down and stayed in a cave in the rock of Etam. The Philistines, determined to capture Samson, invaded Judah, forcing the men of Judah to hand Samson over. However, even when bound and handed over to the Philistines, Samson once again demonstrated his supernatural strength. Verses 14 to 16 recount. As he approached Lehi, the Philistines came toward him shouting. The Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him. The ropes on his arms became like charred flax, and the bindings dropped from his hands. Finding a fresh jawbone of a donkey, he grabbed it and struck down 1,000 men. Then Samson said, "With a donkey's jawbone, I have made donkeys of them. With a donkey's jawbone, I have killed 1,000 men." After this impressive victory, Samson found himself thirsty and exhausted. He called out to the Lord, and God responded in a miraculous way. Verses 18 and 19 describe. Because he was very thirsty, he cried out to the Lord, "You have given your servant this great victory. Must I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised?" Then God opened up the hollow place in Lehi, and water came out of it. When Samson drank, his strength returned, and he revived. So the spring was called En-Hakkore, and it is still there in Lehi. These exploits established Samson as a judge and leader in Israel, as mentioned in verse 20. Samson led Israel for 20 years in the days of the Philistines. However, Samson's challenges were far from over, and his story would continue to unfold with more confrontations, temptations, and ultimately, a dramatic downfall. After his initial exploits against the Philistines, Samson continued to serve as a judge of Israel, demonstrating his extraordinary strength and controversial leadership. Judges chapter 16 provides more details about his feats and the challenges he faced during his period of leadership. One of the most impressive demonstrations of Samson's strength took place in the city of Gaza. Judges 16 verse 1 to 3 recounts. One day Samson went to Gaza, where he saw a prostitute. He went in to spend the night with her. The people of Gaza were told, "Samson is here." So they surrounded the place and lay in wait for him all night at the city gate. They made no move during the night, saying, "At dawn we'll kill him." But Samson lay there only until the middle of the night. Then he got up and took hold of the doors of the city gate, together with the 2 posts, and tore them loose, bar and all. He lifted them to his shoulders and carried them to the top of the hill that faces Hebron. This episode demonstrates not only Samson's exceptional physical strength, but also his audacity and ability to escape from seemingly impossible situations. Tearing off the city gates, including the posts and the bar, and carrying them for a considerable distance to the top of a mountain, was a feat that clearly showed the supernatural power God had granted Samson. During his time as a judge, Samson remained a controversial figure, often acting in ways that seemed to contradict his divine calling. His leadership was marked by acts of individual strength, rather than commanding armies or leading the people in a conventional manner. This is evidenced by the nature of his actions against the Philistines, which were often motivated by personal vengeance or provocations, rather than planned military strategies. Samson's reputation grew among both the Israelites and the Philistines. To the Israelites, he was a source of hope and a symbol of resistance against Philistine oppression. To the Philistines, Samson was a constant threat and an enigma. His supernatural strength and unpredictable actions made him a formidable enemy, as evidenced by the Philistines' determination to discover the secret of his strength, which we will see further in his story. During his time as a judge, Samson likely settled disputes among the Israelites and made decisions on behalf of the people, as was customary for judges of that era. However, the Bible primarily focuses on his confrontations with the Philistines, suggesting that his main role was that of a military deliverer, fulfilling the prophecy of the angel who had appeared to his parents before his birth. Samson's strength was legendary, and his feats inspired and intimidated others. These stories surely spread throughout Israel and among neighboring nations, enhancing his reputation and influence. However, as his fame grew, so did the temptations. Samson demonstrated a recurring weakness for women, which would eventually lead to his downfall. His story serves as a powerful reminder that even those chosen by God and endowed with extraordinary gifts are not immune to human temptations and failures. Samson's period as a judge was marked by an intriguing paradox. On the one hand, he was a man anointed by God, endowed with supernatural strength, and called for a divine purpose. On the other hand, he often acted impulsively and selfishly, giving in to carnal desires and making questionable decisions. This contrast is a recurring theme in the Bible, which often portrays its heroes as complex and fallible figures. Samson's story reminds us that God often chooses to work through imperfect people to accomplish his purposes. It also serves as a warning about the dangers of pride and overconfidence, even for those blessed with extraordinary gifts. Despite his flaws, it is important to remember that Samson is listed among the heroes of faith in Hebrews 11:32-34. And what more shall I say? I do not have time to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised, who shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames, and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. This mention in the New Testament suggests that, despite his failures, Samson's faith and his role in Israel's history were significant in God's eyes. His life serves as a reminder that God can use even our weaknesses to fulfill his purposes. As Samson continued in his role as a judge, his reputation as a man of extraordinary strength and daring deeds continued to grow. However, his personal weaknesses, particularly his attraction to women who did not share his faith, remained a constant in his life. These weaknesses would eventually lead him to a fateful encounter with a woman named Delilah, who would play a crucial role in his downfall. Samson's story takes a decisive turn when he meets Delilah. Judges 16:4 tells us, sometime later, he fell in love with a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. This seemingly casual encounter would mark the beginning of a series of events that would lead to the downfall of the mighty judge of Israel. Delilah was not just another woman in Samson's life. She would become the instrument of his ruin. The Philistine leaders, who had long sought a way to defeat Samson, saw in this new relationship a golden opportunity. They approached Delilah with a tempting proposal, as described in verse 5. The rulers of the Philistines went to her and said, "See if you can lure him into showing you the secret of his great strength and how we can overpower him, so we may tie him up and subdue him. Each one of us will give you 1,100 shekels of silver." This offer of wealth was enough for Delilah to initiate a dangerous game of trust and betrayal with Samson. She began to repeatedly question him about the secret of his extraordinary strength, pretending to be merely curious, but actually seeking a way to deliver him to the Philistines. In verses 6-14, we see 3 failed attempts by Delilah to discover Samson's secret. So Delilah said to Samson, "Tell me the secret of your great strength and how you can be tied up and subdued." Samson answered her, "If anyone ties me with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, I'll become as weak as any other man." Samson, perhaps playing with Delilah or testing her reliability, gave a false answer. Delilah promptly tested this information, only to discover that Samson had lied when he easily broke the bowstrings. On the second attempt, Samson said that new ropes that had never been used would weaken him. Once again, when tested, he proved it was a lie, breaking the ropes as if they were threads. On the third attempt, Samson said that if his braids were woven into the fabric on the loom, he would become weak. Again, when Delilah tried, Samson proved he had lied. Each time Samson deceived Delilah, she accused him of mocking her and not truly trusting her. This emotional tactic is evident in verse 15. Then she said to him, "How can you say, 'I love you,' when you won't confide in me? This is the 3rd time you have made a fool of me and haven't told me the secret of your great strength." The pressure on Samson increased day by day. Delilah was persistent in her attempts to discover his secret. Verse 16 describes the intensity of this pressure. With such nagging, she prodded him day after day until he was sick to death of it. Finally, unable to resist Delilah's constant pressure, Samson revealed his secret. In verse 17, we read his confession. So he told her everything. "No razor has ever been used on my head," he said, "because I have been a Nazirite dedicated to God from my mother's womb. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as any other man." This revelation was a crucial moment in Samson's story. He not only shared the secret of his physical strength, but also exposed the vulnerability of his commitment to God. His hair was not just the source of his strength, but a symbol of his vow as a Nazirite, his special consecration to God. Delilah, realizing that Samson had finally revealed the truth, acted quickly. Verse 18 reports, "When Delilah saw that he had told her everything, she sent word to the rulers of the Philistines, 'Come back once more, he has told me everything.' So the rulers of the Philistines returned with the silver in their hands." Delilah's final betrayal is described in verse 19. After putting him to sleep on her lap, she called for someone to shave off the 7 braids of his hair, and so began to subdue him, and his strength left him. This act of cutting Samson's hair was not just a personal betrayal, but also a violation of his vow to God. With every lock of hair that fell, Samson's supernatural strength diminished until he became as weak as any other man. Tragically, Samson did not realize what had happened at first. Verse 20 recounts, "Then she called, 'Samson, the Philistines are upon you.' He awoke from his sleep and thought, 'I'll go out as before and shake myself free.' But he did not know that the Lord had left him." This passage reveals the sad reality that Samson had distanced himself from God so much that he did not even notice when the Spirit of the Lord departed from him. His confidence in his own strength had blinded him to his dependence on God. With Samson weakened, the Philistines finally managed to capture him. His capture was brutal and humiliating, as described in verse 21. "Then the Philistines seized him, gouged out his eyes, and took him down to Gaza. Binding him with bronze shackles, they set him to grinding grain in the prison." Samson's fall was complete. The man who had once carried the gates of Gaza was now blind, chained, and forced to perform slave labor in the very same city. His strength, his freedom, and his sight were all taken from him. This part of Samson's story serves as a powerful warning about the dangers of giving in to temptations, trusting the wrong people, and straying from God's path. Samson, who had been blessed with supernatural strength and called for a divine purpose, was reduced to a blind prisoner and slave because of his choices. The seduction by Delilah and Samson's subsequent downfall illustrate how even the strongest can be defeated when they are led by selfish desires and compromise their principles. It is a vivid reminder that our true strength comes from our relationship with God and our faithfulness to His ways. Yet, even in this darkest moment of Samson's life, there is a glimpse of hope. Verse 22 says, "But the hair on his head began to grow again after it had been shaved." This seemingly simple detail would be crucial for what was to come. As his hair grew back, symbolizing the renewal of his Nazirite vow, we can imagine that Samson began to reflect on his life, his choices, and his relationship with God. While Samson suffered in captivity, the Philistines celebrated their victory. They decided to hold a great feast in honor of their god Dagon. Verse 23 describes, "Now the rulers of the Philistines assembled to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon their god, and to celebrate, saying, 'Our God has delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hands.'" This celebration of the Philistines was not just an ordinary feast. It was an act of worship to their God, a declaration that their God was more powerful than the God of Israel. By attributing their victory over Samson to Dagon, the Philistines were unknowingly setting the stage for a final demonstration of the power of the true God. The joy of the Philistines was so great that they wanted to humiliate Samson even more. Verse 25 recounts, "While they were in high spirits, they shouted, 'Bring out Samson to entertain us.' So they called Samson out of the prison, and he performed for them, when they stood him among the pillars." We can only imagine what Samson must have felt at that moment. Blind, weak, and ridiculed, he was at the lowest point of his life. Yet, this moment of public humiliation would ironically be Samson's opportunity for one last act of strength and redemption. Despite being blind and weakened, Samson still had a plan. Verse 26 shows Samson asking for help from the young man who guided him. Samson said to the servant who held his hand, "Put me where I can feel the pillars that support the temple, so that I may lean against them." This seemingly innocent request was actually part of his final plan. Even in his blindness, Samson was assessing the structure of the temple, preparing for his final act. The temple where the feast was taking place was crowded. filled not only with common people, but also with Philistine leaders. Verse 27 describes the scene in detail. Now the temple was crowded with men and women. All the rulers of the Philistines were there, and on the roof were about 3,000 men and women watching Samson perform. This description gives us an idea of the magnitude of the event. It was not just a small gathering, but a large national celebration. All the Philistine leaders were present, along with thousands of ordinary people. They had all come to mock Samson and glorify their god Dagon. At this crucial moment, Samson made his last prayer. Verse 28 records his words. Then Samson prayed to the Lord, "Sovereign Lord, remember me. Please God, strengthen me just once more, and let me with one blow get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes." This prayer is remarkable for several reasons. First, it shows that despite everything, Samson still acknowledged God as the source of his strength. He was not relying on himself, but asking God to empower him. Second, it reveals that Samson was willing to give his own life to fulfill his calling. He knew that bringing down the temple would mean his own death, but he was willing to make that sacrifice. Verses 29 and 30 vividly describe Samson's final act. Then Samson reached toward the 2 central pillars on which the temple stood. Bracing himself against them, his right hand on one and his left hand on the other, Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." Then he pushed with all his might, and down came the temple on the rulers and all the people in it. Thus he killed many more when he died than while he lived. This final act of Samson was both a demonstration of his renewed strength and a supreme sacrifice. He gave his own life to defeat the enemies of his people, thereby fulfilling his divine calling to the end. It is important to note that the Bible does not glorify this act of violence, but presents it as the fulfillment of God's purpose for Samson to begin delivering Israel from the Philistines. Verse 31 concludes Samson's story with a touch of respect and honor. Then his brothers and his father's whole family went down to get him. They brought him back and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the tomb of Manoah his father. He had led Israel for 20 years. This final verse reminds us that, despite his failures, Samson was still considered a judge of Israel, someone who had served his people for 2 decades. His family honored him with a proper burial, acknowledging his role in Israel's history. Samson's story is a powerful account of strength, weakness, fall, and redemption. It teaches us several important lessons that remain relevant to our lives today. First, it reminds us of the importance of staying faithful to our commitments to God. Samson often forgot his Nazirite vow, and this led him into trouble. In the same way, we need to remember the promises we have made to God and live according to them. Second, Samson's story warns us of the danger of relying too much on our own strength and forgetting our dependence on God. Samson often acted on his own, trusting in his physical strength rather than seeking God's guidance. This reminds us that our true strength comes from God, not from our abilities. Third, Samson's life vividly illustrates that our actions have consequences, even when we are called by God. Despite being chosen by God before his birth, Samson still suffered the consequences of his wrong choices. This teaches us to think carefully about our actions and decisions. Fourth, Samson's story demonstrates the surprising truth that God can use even our failures and weaknesses to fulfill his purposes. Despite Samson's many mistakes, God still used him to begin to free Israel from the Philistines. This gives us hope that God can work through us despite our imperfections. Finally, Samson's final act reminds us of the possibility of redemption, even after great mistakes and failures. In his last moments, Samson turned back to God and was used one last time in a powerful way. This encourages us never to give up, but to always seek God, no matter what we have done. Friends, Samson's story is more than just an ancient tale. It is a mirror for our own lives. We all have strengths and weaknesses. We all face temptations and challenges. The question is, how do we respond to them? Samson shows us that even the strongest can fall, but also that there is always a chance for redemption. His story challenges us to examine our own lives. Where are we relying too much on our own strength? Where do we need to renew our commitment to God? If this story has touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with your friends and family. Maybe someone you know needs to hear this message of hope and redemption today. And don't stop here. If you want to learn more about the incredible stories of the Bible and the lessons they have for our lives today, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Turn on notifications so you won't miss any new videos. Remember, just like Samson, we all have a divine purpose. May we learn from his mistakes and his final act of faith to live lives that glorify God. See you in the next video, and may God bless you all.